Hey there, Emmanuel here from WebDevFuel, and in today's video you're going to learn exactly how you can deploy a Phoenix LiveView application to an Ubuntu server using Dokku. Now, if you don't know what Dokku is, it basically is an open source alternative to Heroku, and Heroku is a platform as a service, which basically means that it allows you to deploy and then run your applications on the cloud. And again, Dokku is an alternative to Heroku, which is open source, meaning that you can not only use it for free, you only need to pay for the servers that Dokku is running on, but it also means that it is very flexible, meaning that if you are not happy with a cloud provider, you can move it to another one, and that makes it a very powerful tool. Now, the application that we're going to be using to deploy it to the cloud is a simple counter that increases and decreases by 1 each time that we click on each one of these buttons, and not only that, but it will also be stored in a PostgreSQL database, so once we come in here and refresh the page, the counter is still 5, as you can see. Now, the first step and the first thing that we need in order to deploy this application to the cloud is to have, again, an Ubuntu server. And I've used here Linode, I've set up here the server, and I've also gone ahead and set up a user now and done the initial setup of an Ubuntu server. Now, if you don't know exactly how to do that, I'll leave a link in the comments below and on the top right corner also that goes over exactly all the steps that you need in order to set up an Ubuntu server once you want to either deploy it or start developing on the cloud. Now, with this in mind, then once you have your Ubuntu server set up on the cloud, we can go ahead and take the first step, which is to install Dokku. Now, you need to navigate here to dokku.com and then come to the documentation, and also make sure that you pick here the latest version, not the master, so that the documentation matches if you want to go over the documentation. I've picked here version 0.25.1. We can now go ahead and copy this thing right over here, which is going to fetch the bootstrap.sh script. We can paste in here, and as you can see, we now have here this bootstrap.sh file. And next, we need to go ahead and copy this. We need to run this script as sudo, and basically once we run this script, it will set up everything that we need in order to start using Dokku. So let's go ahead, paste this in here. I'm going to go ahead and type my password, and once we do this, it will go ahead and start installing Dokku on your Ubuntu server. And as you can see, Dokku is now installed. It has gone ahead and created the Dokku user and done everything that we need in order to be able to use Dokku inside this Ubuntu server. Now I'm going to go ahead and clean the terminal, and the first thing that we need is for us to set up our SSH keys so that we have access to this server later once we are actually deploying the application. Now again, if you don't know how to set up an Ubuntu server initially, I'll leave a link below in the comments with a video that I've done where I go exactly through the entire process, so you know exactly how to set up your user and also how to set up the SSH keys. But with that in mind, we now need to go ahead and set up the SSH keys with Dokku, and we need to run this command in root mode. So in order to do that, I'm going to type sudo su in order to act as a root user. So let's go ahead and add the SSH key to Dokku so we can again later deploy this application and have access to this server. So what you need to do is start by first of all getting the authorized keys. So you need to write get, then go into the .ssh folder, then you need to choose the authorized keys file, and then we're going to pipe this into Dokku SSH keys, and then we want to add the new SSH key to the admin. And as you can see now, it says here, it gave us this message back, but this basically means that our SSH keys that we again took from our, in this case, Emmanuel user, we've taken that SSH key and added to the to Dokku, meaning that it has now added also the SSH keys to its authorized keys. Now we can go ahead and exit the root mode since we don't need to be in root anymore, and we can start by creating our application, and we're going to do that by typing Dokku apps, then create, and then we're going to define the name of the application, which in this case it is going to be counter. And as you can see, it says here creating counter, and the counter application was just created. Now the next step is for us to add a database, and we're also going to add the database using Dokku. And in order to do that, we need to first of all go here. You can search for Dokku and then Dokku Postgres, which is a plugin that we're going to be using with Dokku in order to create and manage PostgreSQL instances. And you can simply copy here the script where it says here installation, and then paste it in here. You need to run it as sudo. And once we click in here, it will start by going through the entire process that it needs in order to set up PostgreSQL plugin for Dokku. And as you can see, this went all well. It is now installed, so we can now go ahead and create our PostgreSQL instance. So we're going to do that by typing here Dokku Postgres, then create, and we're going to name the database DB. And as you can see, it created here our config directory, our data directory. It also added here an ID. So it essentially set up automatically everything that we need in order to now connect our application, our counter application, to this database instance. And in order to do that, we simply need to type Dokku Postgres, and then we need to type here link. It means basically that we are linking our database to our application, and we're going to simply type here db, which is the name of the database, and then we're going to type also counter, which is the name of the application. And as you can see here, it set up here the configuration variable of database URL, which then later Phoenix LiveView, and more specifically the Phoenix framework, is going to be using this variable right over here in order to be able to connect to this Postgres instance that we just created using Dokku. Now the next step is for us to add all the environment variables that we need later when deploying the application, and in order to do that we simply need to type Dokku config and then set. And with this done, we need to now choose our application, which is counter. And now we can start adding all the keys and its values. So the first one that we want to add is lcall, which stands for locality, and this basically is for currency and time purposes, and we're going to set this one as ENUS and then UTF-8. We also want to set up our mix environment, which will set up as prod, which stands for production, and finally we need to add a secret key base, and this is basically the secret key that Phoenix is going to later use in order to run the application. And in order to basically create a random key, it has to be strong, it has to be at least 64 bits. So in order to do that, we simply can navigate to our local Phoenix project and just run phoenix phx.gen.secret, and as you can see, it will give us back here a secret that is strong and that we can use here as the environment variable. So with that in mind, again, you need to set here lc all, then also the mix environment, and finally the secret key base. So with that said, go ahead and run this command. And as you can see, it just said it says here that it is setting the config variables, and this means that the config variables are now set up. So if we go ahead here and then type here config and then show the config variables of our counter application, as you can see here, it is now set database URL, the mixenv, the lcall, and also the secret key base, which means that we have all the environment variables that we need in order to deploy this application. Now the next step is for us to set up the domain that someone is going to visit in order to see our application. And the first thing that we need to do before we actually set up the domain with Dokku is to point our domain to our server IP address. And in order to do that, I'm going to be using Namecheap, which is where I bought my domain. But if you bought your domain in another place, this is more or less the same thing. You simply need to come to your DNS settings and then add a new record, and the record has to be an A record. Now, if you're pointing your primary domain, so in this case it would be webdevfuel.com, you would simply add this right over here. But because I'm going to be using a subdomain, I'm simply going to type here counter, which is the name of the application, and then we need to add here the IP address of the server in which Dokku is running, which we have right over here on Linode. So I'm going to simply copy this and then paste it in here. And now after we save the changes, we need to wait a little bit for all of these changes to propagate and for this counter subdomain to actually be pointing here to the IP address. I'm going to just again wait a little bit and then we can continue. So now that our host name is pointing to this IP address, we can now go ahead and add our domain using Dokku. So in order to do that, we simply need to type Dokku, then domains add, and then we need to choose the name of the application, which again in this case is counter, and we now simply need to add here the domain name, which again was counter.webfuel.com. And as you can see, it says here that it has added the counter.webfuel.com to the counter application. Okay, so now with the domain added to Dokku, we need to go ahead and go to our production file where we store our configuration, and we tell Phoenix what our host name is, and we need to go ahead and change the host name to also reflect the host name that we've just set up on Heroku. So with that in mind, simply go back to your project on your local machine, then navigate to the config folder, and inside the config folder look for this prod.exs file. And in here we simply need to change again the host, which in here it is now by default example.com, but we're going to go ahead and type in here webdevfuel.com. Now the next step is for us to set up our build packs, which are basically set of instructions that tells Dokku exactly how it should deploy our application. Now, in order to do that, let's start by first of all creating here on our root folder on the project. Let's start by creating a .buildpacks file, and in here we want to add two different things. The first thing that we want to add is first of all this Heroku build pack elixir, which is going to give the instructions on how to build the elixir part of the project. And next we also want to add Phoenix static, which is going to take care of the node part of the project. Now first let's start here with the Heroku build pack elixir, and we need to start by copying this GitHub link over here, and then we need to paste it in here and also add here .git to the end. And now we need to do the same thing with this Heroku build pack Phoenix static. So let's go ahead and copy also this link, and then we need to add to the end .git, since these both of these are Git projects. Now with this done, we'll start by first of all setting up the configuration of our elixir build pack, and in order to do that, simply go ahead and copy this configuration file name right over here, and we need to also add it to our root folder. Let's go ahead and create the file, and we need to add two different things. First of all, let's start by setting up our Erlang version, which is going to be 24.0.5, and we also want to add our elixir version, which is going to be 1.12.2. And now we want to do the same thing for this Heroku build pack for all our Phoenix static assets, which again is going to take care of the node part of the application. So let's go ahead and do the exact same thing. First of all, we need to copy here this Phoenix static build pack.config file name. We're going to go ahead and create this file, and then in here we simply need to type node version, and the node version that we're going to be defining is 14.17 .free, which is the latest LTS node version. And with this done, we are almost ready to deploy our application. First, we need now to add here to Git our remote, a remote basically to our server, so we can then push our changes to the server, and that's the way that we're going to be deploying our application similarly to Heroku. So let's go ahead and do that. First of all, we need to type git remote add Dokku, then we need to add here Dokku at then we need to type our server IP address, and then we need to add here our application name so that Dokku knows exactly to what application we want to deploy from this Git project. Now let's go ahead and add this remote, and with this done we are almost ready. Now we can go ahead and add all of these changes to Git, and then let's go ahead and commit all of these changes with the message of add buildpack files. And now, as you can see, it has committed all of these changes, and now we can simply go ahead and push all of these changes from the main branch to the master branch. So basically from the main branch on our local machine to the master branch on our server, and once we go ahead and run this command, it is going to start deploying for the first time. So with that said, let's go ahead and deploy the application. And as you can see, the application is now deployed to counter.webdevfuel.com. Now, before we are actually able to navigate to this URL and start using the application, we still need to do a couple of things. Now, when I first set up this Ubuntu server, I've set up a firewall and only allowed traffic to come through the port 22, which is the SSH port. But we also want to allow it to go through the port 80, and in order to do that, we simply need to type sudo ufw allow http. And now, with the port open and allowing traffic to go through it, we simply need to go ahead and migrate the database in order to be able again to fetch the counter value and also update it once it increases or decreases. So in order to do that, we need to first of all run Dokku run, and this is basically going to allow us to run commands inside our Dokku containers. And then we're going to type here the application name, and again we want to migrate the database, so we're simply going to type mixacto.migrate. And as you can see, it says here that it's running the deploy migration add counter table, and then it creates a counter table, and it also adds a default value of 0 with the inserted at and updated at values also inside the database. So now we are ready to go back to our browser, and let's go ahead and also open here this tab so it disables the cache, and we can also we can make sure that we see the correct page. And now let's go ahead and simply navigate to counter.webdevfuel.com, and as you can see, we have here our application deployed to the cloud on counter.webdevfuel.com, and the same as with our application running on localhost. If we go ahead and increase the counter, and then if we refresh the page, the counter is still 8, as you can see. Now the last thing that we want to do on this application is to actually secure it. As you can see here, it says here that it is not secure, and that because all the traffic is flowing through the port 80, and we want to actually make sure that we can navigate to HTTPS and the traffic starts flowing to the 443 port. So in order to do that, let's first of all start by also installing another Dokku plugin, which is the Let's Encrypt plugin. And if you're familiar with Let's Encrypt, it is basically a way, a free way for us to generate encryption certificates and actually be able to encrypt our application. So let's go ahead and first of all copy this, and we need to simply run this command on our server in order to install Dokku Let's Encrypt. And now with the Let's Encrypt plugin installed, we simply need to go back here and let's copy this command. And we're going to go ahead and copy this command, and this command basically sets an environment variable on our application. So let's go ahead and type here the application name, which is counter, and then we need to basically set up this environment variable, which is going to be the email that Let's Encrypt is going to be using in order to actually generate a certificate for us. So I'm going to simply type here Emmanuel at webdevfuel.com, and with this in mind, we now updated here the environment variables. And if you go again here to Dokku config show, and then we type here our application name, as you can see, we have here our Dokku Let's Encrypt email. So with this done, we can now come back here and just let's go ahead and copy this part right over here, which says that we're going to use Dokku to enable the Let's Encrypt plugin on our counter application. So let's go ahead and run this command in order to enable Let's Encrypt. So as you can see, it basically generated our certificate, and it also mapped not only the 80 port from here, the 5000 port which is running on the container, to the 80 port which was already happening before, but it also has also gone ahead and mapped the 443 port, which is the HTTPS port. Now we still need to do two different things before we can actually go ahead and navigate to the browser and actually see our application secured. The first thing that we want to do is come back to our prod.exs file, which again is inside the config folder, and we need to change here the port from 80 to 443, and we also want to add here the following: a scheme key, and then the value has to be HTTPS. Now basically we use this each time that we want to, in this case we are behind an Nginx, and since we are already encrypting this application at that level, we simply need to add again here the port 443 and also the scheme of HTTPS. And now with this done, we need to simply go ahead, again add here our changes. Then let's go ahead and commit this with a message of update prod.exs for Let's Encrypt. And then with all of this done, we can go ahead and redeploy our application to the server. And now the application has just been redeployed, and as you can see, it has been deployed to HTTP counter webdevfuel.com and also to HTTPS. Now the last thing that we need in order to be able to navigate is just like before, we need to go ahead and allow traffic, but this time through the 443 port, which in this case with the uncomplicated firewall, the rule is called HTTPS. So with this done, now we can go back to the browser. We can open this page right over here, and once we refresh it, we should see, as you can see right now, it says here that the connection is secure, which means that we have now deployed an entire Phoenix LiveView application to the cloud using Dokku, and it is also secure, which means that the traffic is flowing through HTTPS, and it basically means that the application, basically the communication between the client and the server, is always secure. And again, if you go ahead and try here to decrease the counter, for example, to 3, and if we refresh the page, and not only that, if we try to go to a private tab right over here, you can see that the counter also reflects here the counter that we've defined. As you can see, it is very easy to deploy a Phoenix LiveView application to the cloud using Dokku, which is a great and cheaper alternative to Heroku. Now, if you enjoyed this video, leave a like below, let me know in the comments what you want me to cover in the future, and also subscribe for more content like this.